Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to get through this thing called Pitchfork. Electric word, Pitchfork. It means reviews you don't like, and there's a mighty lot of those. But I'm here to tell you that I can't make the Prince thing go any further than it... Yeah, I just did it. I'm sorry I did that, Prince. Wherever you are, I'm sorry. So Pitchfork put out their top 200 albums of the 2010s, and it's about what you think it would be. The list kind of sucks, but it sucks in different ways than the ways that I thought it was going to suck, because to understand how I thought it was going to suck, I got to kind of give you a primer on Pitchfork and their history, and avoid getting lost in those details the way I did in some of the earlier iterations of this video. So Pitchfork, in the beginning, back in the 90s, in the 2000s, especially in the first half of the 2000s, was this elite place where the uber music snobs went to get their opinions. You know, it was like the patron deity of every snobby record collector and snooty record store clerk, and it was basically just pompous elitism to the nth degree, loving the indie, hating everything even remotely popular, to the point where a lot of the infamous Pitchfork reviews, people don't realize that was Pitchfork's editorial line in those days, you know. The average Pitchfork reader probably would have also listened to Lateralis or The Fragile and been like, this offended me so much, I need to go listen to Yo La Tengo to detox. And that's what Pitchfork was, to varying degrees, up until the middle part of the 2010s. You know, there was a little bit of a shift in the early 2010s towards, like, there were a lot of attempts to end the sex club era of pop music before it actually ended. And, but after that shift, Pitchfork became very different. It became very pop-centric, very hip-hop-centric, and they kind of buried a lot of the hipsterisms of early Pitchfork, because the site changed hands, I think, around 2014-ish, and it was purchased, I believe, I could be wrong, by a parent organization that manages a lot of, like, teen magazines and women's magazines, and if I'm remembering right. And so the reorganization kind of, it made sense. It made sense, and it was also where the public tastes were moving. You know, I think people got a little bit sick of the nerd position being the mainstream in music criticism. So post-2014 Pitchfork is very pop-centric. It gets a little bit too Slay Queen for my tastes, if only because there's something profoundly disingenuous about a site that spent 20 years telling me that quality music was garbage because it was on a major label, turning around and being like, Cardi B, #1 album of 2018, I kind of like Cardi B, but it's just the wrongness of Pitchfork telling me that. That puts me off. So that's kind of what you need to know going into this list. And because of that, I expected that this list was going to be a very uncomfortable blend of, you know, the pop hits from the last 5 years and the hipster stuff from the 5 years before that. And that's more or less what it was, but it was different. It was very different. Like, they did not go as hard on the pop as I thought they were going to, and they went a lot harder on what I like to call the nothing indie artists. You know, the no-names that Pitchfork puts up on these pedestals, and they're out of the public consciousness within a year. You know, this list was dominated by those people. Maybe not the upper echelon, but the bottom half and the middle chunk was all about those people. I mean, they put Sleigh Bells on this list. I haven't heard that name in almost a decade, and they put Sleigh Bells on this list. Outside of that, it was mostly the usual suspects. You know, Bon Iver was way too high. There were like 4 of the 1975 albums on this list, despite the fact that the 1975 have never put out a good album. There was a Nicki Minaj album higher up than a Kate Bush album. Bon Iver was like a full 100 places higher than Fleet Foxes. Vampire Weekend were in the top 10 when they really should not have been. Like, I love Modern Vampires of the City. It's a great album. It's a great album because it's almost like the 1996 grunge album of 2000's indie releases, because it's an album that shows a new and interesting and creative way forward that was ultimately discarded because the genre just died. And so it's a great album, but Pitchfork repeats their mistake. It's a great album. It was not the album of the year. It should not have been the album of the year in 2013. That should have been, it probably should have been Daft Punk. But 2013 Pitchfork was not ready to acknowledge that a group that was made up of anything other than indie white men from America could actually make good music at that point. And yes, I know that one of the members of Vampire Weekend isn't white. Janelle Monáe was way too far down the list, which I kind of suspect is Pitchfork trying to overcompensate, because there was a point in time where for Pitchfork to really respect and admire you as a black artist, you had to be like Janelle Monáe and go above and beyond and just make next level artistic statements. And I feel like they're trying to push back on that, because for so long Pitchfork was like, the only two rappers I think Pitchfork really liked in the 2000s were Kanye and MF Doom. And I like Kanye and MF Doom too, but there were other good rappers in the 2000s. Okay, since I've brought up Kanye, let's talk about the weird thing with Kanye and Kendrick and Beyonce, because I figured the way that Pitchfork's tastes have gone in the past, the way that I think the general consensus is, I figured it would go Kanye, Beyonce, Kendrick, especially since Kanye has done basically nothing but annoy people for the last 2 years, especially with the kind of liberal elites that Pitchfork represent. And that's a term I'm not crazy on using, because I don't know that Pitchfork are actually all that liberal. I mean, look at how they treated Lana Del Rey when she came out. And also, by some definitions, I would be a liberal elite, just by virtue of where I live. But anyway, as I was saying, they didn't do that. They actually went Kendrick, Beyonce, and then Kanye, which was fascinating to me. And the number one was Frank Ocean, which I could see, if it had been Channel Orange, I could totally buy that, because I love Channel Orange. One of the greatest R&B albums of the last 20 years. But instead they went for Blonde, which I've never actually gotten around to listening to. I kind of fell into a black hole in 2016 and just did not listen to new music for a while after that. And it was really interesting, because they went To Pimp a Butterfly, self-titled by Beyonce, My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, and then Blonde. And that was kind of, I was expecting To Pimp a Butterfly or Lemonade to be number one. Because those are kind of the obvious ones. Those are both very deep, conceptual albums that try to say powerful, meaningful things about the black experience in America. But yeah, so that was very interesting to me. If I remember correctly, Lana Del Rey was way up there as well. Like, I think Norman effing Rockwell was somewhere in the, either in the high 20s or maybe even the high teens. I don't remember. It was in there somewhere. Okay, so it was 19, which I can sort of agree with, because that's an amazing album. I mean, it should be on the list. I don't know if it should be number 19. Phenomenal album. We stan. Other weird things, Tame Impala were way too high on the list. Particularly, which Tame Impala album is it? This is why my videos are so heavily edited, people. I have it over there. I think it's the 2015 one. I think it's Currents. That was way too high. I've never really liked that album all that much. I think in some ways the omissions are more interesting than the actual things that went on the list, because it really says something about current Pitchfork's tastes, and to some degree the tastes of the critical music establishment as a whole at the moment. I've been seeing a lot of bitterness in the last 2 years from usually people in their mid-30s to and above about how the current orthodoxy of popular music doesn't really seem to have a whole lot of a place for hard rock in it. And that's definitely reflected on this list. There's no Queens of the Stone Age, which really surprised me because Pitchfork loved them for years. There's also no Animal Collective. I would have thought Centipede HZ would have been on here, but Pitchfork kind of... It always kind of bothered me with Animal Collective how, you know, everybody loves Merriweather Post Pavilion, and then as soon as that happened, as soon as that era was over, it was like everybody turned on Animal Collective and was like, why is it weird? Why does it sound like that? That was the point of Animal Collective, was that it sounded like that. You just accidentally fell in love with a single album that they did that happened to kind of be pop. So there's that. In general, I would have to say that it seemed like Pitchfork, when they were making this list, basically deliberately excluded any experimental album that wasn't either made by an electronic artist or a black person. And I sort of see why they would do that. I mean, they're very clearly trying to rebrand themselves and be something different from what older Pitchfork was, but it comes off a little disingenuous again. They left off Swans, which was very interesting. I mean, that one I could understand a little more because the accusations against Michael Gira are pretty heinous if they're true, which they probably are. And if that's why they left it off, I completely understand that, especially considering the degree to which most people sort of swept that under the rug. But Nick Cave, there was no reason to leave Nick Cave off, or Tom Waits, or any of those. Like, as my friend Eric put it, it's almost like they just decided to scrub all the old white men from the list. Radiohead were a lot farther down on the list, though, than they had been previously, and that's interesting because it's... The evolution of Radiohead in the 2010s has been so interesting to watch, because it's almost like people are finally waking up to the fact that they didn't really break all that much new ground after Amnesiac, and as good as In Rainbows was as an album, their later work is not as deserving as a lot of people act like it is. But anyway, that's my hot take for the day. So yeah, so this list kind of sucks. But that's it's taste, you know. It's a list catered to the very specific, very elite audience that would follow the continuity pretty much unbroken from early 2010s Pitchfork to today. So if you are that random person whose favorite band is Sleigh Bells and Ariana Grande, this list is for you. But for most people who are into music in a serious way, I don't know that it necessarily is. I don't know. That sounds a little more pretentious than I intended it to be, but basically what I'm saying is I thought the list was kind of whatever, and yeah, so I will see you guys later, hopefully with the long-awaited review of Doyle's The Nape of Staples.